I spent 30 years locked up for murdering my best friend. Only on his deathbed did I find out he'd been alive the whole time, and he was the one who set me up. If you're listening to me right now, maybe it's because you felt firsthand what it's like to be judged before you even get a chance to speak. Or maybe because you know what it means to carry a burden that isn't yours to bear. I'm Sebastian, I'm 58 years old, and until recently, I was just a number in a cell. Today I'm a free man with a story you're not going to believe. But before I go on, do me a favor. Give this a thumbs up so this story can reach more people, because there are a lot of folks out there who need to hear this. The gates of Ohio State Penitentiary closed behind me for the last time this past March. 30 years, 10,950 days. I counted every damn one of them. You know what hit me first when I stepped onto that sidewalk? It wasn't the smell of freedom I'd been dreaming about. It was fear. Pure, raw fear. The town had turned into something I didn't recognize. Cars I'd never seen before, people talking to thin air. Found out later they were on cell phones, machines everywhere you looked. When I walked into a corner store and the kid behind the counter swiped my stuff through some beeping contraption, I nearly bolted. 30 years back, money was money. Cash. Coins you could feel in your pocket. Now everything was plastic cards, PIN numbers, electronic beeps. At the transitional housing where they stuck me, I didn't leave my room for a solid week. Just lay there staring at water stains on the ceiling, listening to the sounds outside. Cars racing by, horns honking, music blasting at all hours. Inside prison, the quiet before dawn was something sacred. Out here, this town never shut up. Felt like I'd been thrown into the future, but it was a future that had no place for me. When I finally got up the nerve to venture out, every street corner hit me with a memory and a gut punch. The town square where Charlie and I used to play ball as kids, paved over for a parking lot. Tony's bar where we'd knock back beers after our shifts, torn down for a shopping mall. The garage where I'd worked for 5 years, getting my hands dirty and proud of it. Some fancy apartment complex now. Charlie, my best friend since we were 7 years old. The man they said I killed in cold blood. Want to know something? I always knew I was innocent, but knowing something and proving it, those are two completely different animals. It was January of 1984. I was 28, Charlie was too. We busted our backs for peanuts and didn't expect much more than that. He was a night watchman at a freight company. I was turning wrenches at a small garage. Weekends were everything to us. Ice-cold beer at Tony's, arguing about the Bengals, griping about how life was kicking our asses. That particular night, Charlie was acting all jumpy, kept patting his jacket pocket, looking over his shoulder, sweating like he'd run a marathon. His kids, little Bobby, who was 5, and Anne, who was 3, had come down with something nasty. His wife, Grace, was 7 months along with their third and stuck on bed rest. Bills were piling up higher than snowdrifts, and some loan shark was breathing down his neck. They're running a scam, Sebastian, he told me after his third Budweiser. Trucks roll in with 100 crates, but only 80 make it to the destination. 20 just vanish into thin air. So what's that got to do with us, Charlie? Everything. He pulled out this manila envelope, hands shaking. I copied some paperwork. Turn this over to the right people, and I'm looking at 15, maybe 20 grand. That's real money, Sebastian. 20,000 in 1984. That was down payment on a house money. I got why he was desperate. We went at it. I told him he was playing with fire, that he could lose his job or worse. He said he was out of options, that his family was going under. Things got heated real quick. He called me yellow. I called him a damn fool. We stormed out of that bar mad as hell at each other. Last time I laid eyes on Charlie, or so I thought for the next 30 years. 2 days later, cops were pounding on my door. Charlie had gone missing. They'd found blood all over his kitchen, furniture knocked around, front door busted in. And what did they find in the trunk of my beat-up Volkswagen? Flannel shirt Charlie had been wearing the night we fought, soaked in blood. I had no earthly idea how that shirt ended up there. I swear on my mother's grave and everything holy. But who was going to believe some working stiff with no alibi who'd been throwing punches with the victim just hours before? The detective didn't want to hear my side of things. Just come clean, Sebastian. Save everyone the trouble. The whole town was hungry for someone to blame. Unsolved murders made the police chief look bad, made the mayor look bad, made everybody look bad. The trial was a joke. Court-appointed lawyer who couldn't be bothered to read the file, prosecutor looking to make his bones, local newspaper painting me as some kind of monster. Mechanic murders best friend in cold blood. That was the headline that followed me everywhere. Murder over what? We were closer than blood brothers. They didn't have a body, but they had enough to satisfy a town that wanted answers. Bloody shirt, heated argument, no alibi to speak of. In 1984, in small-town Ohio, being poor and black meant you were guilty until proven innocent. And sometimes not even then. They gave me 30 to life. I turned down every plea deal, every chance at parole, because accepting those deals meant admitting I'd done something I hadn't. And I was innocent as the day I was born. My wife Mary stuck by me those first few years, every Sunday like clockwork, 2-hour bus ride each way, homemade food in Tupperware containers, news from the outside world. She believed in me when nobody else would. But time's got a way of grinding down even the strongest people. I remember her last visit clear as yesterday, December of '89, 5 years into my sentence. She walked in different somehow, hair styled short, clothes I'd never seen, wearing perfume that wasn't the Avon stuff she usually wore. "Sebastian," she said, reaching across that scratched-up table to take my hand, "I can't do this anymore." "Can't do what, Mary?" "This whole thing. Everyone in town looks at me like I'm married to a killer. Lost my job at the elementary school. Old friends cross the street when they see me coming. I'm scrubbing toilets just to keep the lights on. But you know I didn't hurt Charlie." "I know." She let out this long, shaky breath. "What if I'm wrong? What if everyone else sees something I don't? Because if you did it, Sebastian, if you'd just admit it, maybe we could both move on." That cut deeper than any shiv ever could. "I can't confess to something I didn't do, Mary. I just can't." She started crying right there in front of God and everybody, cried so hard the guard came over to check on us. "Then this is where it ends," she said. "I'm sorry, but I can't carry this anymore." She walked out and never came back. Heard through the grapevine years later that she'd taken up with some shopkeeper, a widower who treated her right. She died of a heart attack in 2003. They wouldn't even let me attend her funeral. 2 months after I got out, I went to pay my respects at old Joe's funeral. He'd owned the garage where I used to work. Figured I'd see some familiar faces, maybe have a normal conversation for once. The funeral parlor was packed. Joe had been well liked around the neighborhood. I was standing in the viewing line when I spotted this guy with his back to me, maybe 10 feet ahead. Grey hair, shoulders a bit stooped with age, something about the way he carried himself. How he'd slip his hand into his back pocket when he was thinking hard. How he'd scratch behind his right ear when something made him nervous. Little habits I'd known since we were kids running around in short pants. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Couldn't be possible. The man turned sideways to shake hands with Joe's widow. There it was, a small scar on his neck, mostly hidden by his collar. Same scar from when Charlie took a header off his bike at age 10, racing down Miller's Hill. I was the one who walked him to the emergency room, his head bleeding all over my shirt while he bawled his eyes out. It was him, my best friend, my destroyer, alive and breathing. I tailed him out to the parking lot, trying to stay invisible. He climbed into a silver Chevy with Michigan plates and drove off slow and careful. I scratched the license number onto a napkin, my hand shaking so bad I could barely write. Spent the next 2 weeks haunting that cemetery like some kind of ghost. Asked everyone, the groundskeeper, the flower lady, the guy who sold memorial candles. "You know a man about this tall grey hair, little scar on his neck?" Nobody had answers. Finally, Tommy the security guard threw me a bone. "There's this fellow comes by every week to visit his mother-in-law's grave. Quiet type, always brings white flowers. Sounds like who you're describing." I started timing my visits to match his schedule. 3rd week, there he was, standing over a simple headstone, holding a single white rose. Followed him across town to a neighborhood I'd never seen before. Rose Garden subdivision, out on Maple Street. Modest little house with flower boxes in the windows and a lawn that somebody took pride in. Took me another week of careful detective work to piece together his story. Chatted up the folks at the corner market, the pharmacist guy who ran the Jiffy Lube. slow and steady like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. "John Smith," the market owner told me. "Been living here going on 25 years now. Showed up with 3 little ones," said his wife passed giving birth to the youngest. "Raised those boys by himself until he found love again." By himself. Grace had died in childbirth, just like he'd told everyone. That's how he could start fresh as a widower. Few years later he married Helen from the Methodist Church, had a couple more kids with her. Solid family, you know. John always kept to himself, though. Didn't like having his picture taken, stayed away from block parties, said he had a bad ticker. Bad ticker. Now I knew what kind of heart condition he really had. I spent weeks learning his routine. Left for work at the hardware store before sunrise, home by 6. Sundays meant church with the whole family. Simple life, nothing fancy. I introduced myself to his kids as an old friend from way back, said I'd been trying to track down John for years. They weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. "Funny thing," said the oldest boy, Bobby, that same 5-year-old who'd been sick back in '84, now a man of 45 with kids of his own. Dad never mentioned any Sebastian, and he had a memory like a steel trap when it came to childhood stuff. "Maybe he had his reasons for not bringing it up," I said. "We had a falling out years ago. Nothing serious, but it stuck with both of us." Anne, now 43 and sharp as her mother had been, studied my face like she was trying to place me. "You look familiar somehow." "We met before?" Ice water in my veins. Anne had been just a baby when everything went to hell, but she'd always been scary smart. Charlie used to brag about her memory. "Don't think so," I lied. "Maybe I just have one of those faces." Bobby exchanged looks with his wife. "Look, mister, you might be legit, but our dad's in bad shape. Had a massive heart attack couple weeks back. He's in intensive care. Can't have just anybody walking in there." I pressed harder. Spun some story about traveling from out of state, about wanting to make things right before time ran out. Bobby finally caved. "All right, but only because Dad's been talking in his sleep about regrets and unfinished business. Maybe you're part of that. 5 minutes max, and one of us stays with you." St. Luke's Hospital reeked of industrial cleaner and human misery. Charlie, John, was hooked up to more machines than I could count. Skinny as a rail, skin grey as old newspaper, but it was definitely him. No question about it. First visit was tense as a wire. Anne stuck to me like glue, watching every move I made. Charlie was unconscious, breathing shallow and uneven. On the bedside table sat a worn leather wallet and a wristwatch that stopped my heart cold. My father's watch. Same one he'd given both of us for our 18th birthday. "So you boys never forget your brothers," Dad had said. "You'll fight, you'll go different ways, but family is family." Charlie had kept that watch for 40 years. Even after what he'd done to me, even after destroying my life, he'd held on to it. One of the nurses whispered to Anne, "Poor man's been having nightmares. Middle of the night he'll cry out this name. Sebastian. You two must have been close." "We were," I managed, my throat tight as a fist. Anne's eyes got real interested. "So you're the Sebastian. He's been saying that name whenever the medication makes him confused. We figured it was maybe some saint he was praying to." I came back every day that week. Anne relaxed her guard a little. Bobby even thanked me for sitting with the old man. "He seems more peaceful when you're around," he said. Charlie would surface sometimes, but the drugs and sickness kept him foggy. Or maybe he just didn't want to face what he was seeing. Second week, everything changed. I was alone with him, family had gone down to the cafeteria, when Charlie's eyes fluttered open. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then slowly turned his head toward me. Confusion at first, then his eyes went wide as saucers. He knew me. Tried to speak, but the breathing tube made it impossible. Tried to move, but his body wouldn't cooperate. Just his eyes wide with terror and something else. Guilt so heavy it filled the room. I leaned close to his ear and whispered, "I know, Charlie. I know everything." He tried to shake his head, tried to deny it. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "I know you didn't die that night. I know you planted that bloody shirt in my car. I know you let me rot in prison for 30 years while you lived your life." More tears. He attempted to squeeze my hand, but didn't have the strength. "But I also know why you did it," I continued. "Grace, the babies, the loan sharks, you were drowning and saw one way out. This time his fingers managed to close around mine, weak as a dying bird, but he was trying to tell me something. Early Friday morning, hospital called. Charlie was failing fast, family should come quick. When I got there, everybody was in the hallway crying and holding each other. Inside the room, Charlie was talking to himself, rambling words that didn't make sense to anyone but me. Wasn't him? Sebastian never knew. I planted the evidence. Forgive me. God forgive me. His kids stood there looking lost. What's he talking about? Who's Sebastian? Money only lasted 5 years and had to come back. Neighborhood was different. Old-timers were gone. Nobody left who'd recognize me. Bobby gripped his father's hand. Dad, you're not making sense. What money? What evidence? Best friend I ever had, destroyed my best friend. 30 years locked up. Jesus, please forgive me. I stepped closer to the bed. Through his delirium, Charlie saw me and managed to squeeze my hand. Barely any strength left, like a child's grip. From the pocket of his hospital gown, he pulled out my father's watch, pressed it into my palm, and closed my fingers around it. Brothers, he whispered. Only clear word he spoke. He died holding my hand. After 30 years of lies, he finally told the truth. Problem was, he told it to me instead of the world. His kids were shaken up by what they'd heard. Bobby cornered me in the hallway. Did any of that make sense to you? All that talk about evidence and prison time? I looked into his eyes, same honest eyes Charlie had as a boy, before life backed him into a corner. Sometimes when people are dying, their minds play tricks, I said. Old memories get mixed up with dreams and guilt about things that never happened. He always said there was something terrible in his past, Anne added, but we thought he was just being dramatic. He was such a good father, worked so hard for us kids. He was a good father. Charlie had managed that much at least. I tried doing things the right way. Talked to lawyers, retired cops, newspaper reporters. Same answer every time. Without solid proof, there's nothing we can do. And even if there was, statute of limitations ran out years ago. One lawyer laid it out plain. Mr. Sebastian, you lost 30 years of your life. That's not coming back, no matter what we prove. Your wife's gone, your youth is gone. Maybe it's time to let sleeping dogs lie. Let sleeping dogs lie, like it was that simple. Spent 2 months writing a letter to Charlie's children. Told them everything. The freight company scam, the stolen money, the faked death, the evidence he planted. The 3 decades I spent behind bars for a crime I never committed. Wrote it, tore it up, started over. 8 different versions. Halfway through the 9th draft, I stopped, looked at the family photo sitting on my kitchen table, just a small studio apartment. But it was mine. His children, grandchildren, his second wife Helen. Good people, hard-working folks who loved the memory of John Smith. What right did I have to tear all that down? What good would come from telling them their father and grandfather was a thief who'd destroyed an innocent man's life? Those grandkids would grow up knowing their beloved grandpa was a criminal. Bobby and Anne would carry shame for crimes they never committed. Helen would spend her golden years knowing she'd been married to a fugitive. I folded that letter and stuck it in my dresser drawer, right next to my father's watch. 2 months after the funeral, I bumped into Bobby at the grocery store. He had his teenage son with him, a kid who looked just like Charlie at that age. Sebastian, good to see you. We've been wondering how you were doing. Getting by. How about you folks? Taking it one day at a time. Still miss Dad something fierce, but he left us with so much good. Bobby put his arm around his boy's shoulders. This is John Jr., my oldest. Johnny, this is Sebastian. He was your grandfather's friend. The kid shook my hand politely. In his eyes I saw the same basic goodness Charlie had possessed as a child, before desperation made him do terrible things. Grandpa used to talk about you, the boy said. He'd say he had a childhood friend who was like a brother to him. My chest tightened up. Yeah, we were pretty close back in the day. He always seemed sad about something, Johnny continued. Mom said he felt bad about hurting someone he cared about. Was that you? Bobby looked embarrassed. Johnny, you can't just ask people things like that. It's okay, I said, looking at this kid who didn't know he was carrying his grandfather's guilt. Sometimes people make mistakes when they're scared or desperate. The important thing is your grandpa had a good heart even when he made bad choices." "He really did," the boy said, smiling. "I said my goodbyes right there. Never sought them out again. Yesterday marked 1 year since Charlie died. I walked over to where the old town square used to be, just a parking lot now, like I said. But there's still one wooden bench under an oak tree where we used to sit after school, making plans for when we grew up. I remembered the day Dad gave us those watches. You boys are going to go different directions, maybe even fight each other someday. But deep down, you're brothers, and brothers find a way to forgive." I pulled out the watch and set it on that bench, not throwing it away but letting it go, giving it back to time, to memory, to the forgiveness I'd chosen to embrace, because I finally understood something. Those iron bars stopped holding me in March, but the prison of hatred only opened yesterday. Charlie betrayed me, destroyed my life, stole 30 years I'll never get back. But he also lived with that guilt for 40 years, lost his first wife, spent decades looking over his shoulder, died calling out my name in his sleep. We both destroyed each other. Difference is, I chose to break that cycle. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing not to carry poison in your heart. It means understanding that sometimes good people make evil choices when they're backed into a corner. Charlie was trapped in 1984. Sick kids, pregnant wife, loan sharks threatening his family. Doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. Me? I was trapped too. Trapped by rage, by the need for justice, by wanting the world to know the truth. But real freedom doesn't come from human courts. It comes from making peace with yourself. These days, I wake up knowing I'm truly free. Not because I got out of prison, but because I chose to let go of the anger. I don't have family, don't have money, don't have many years left, but I've got something I hadn't felt in decades: peace. Sometimes I see Charlie's kids around town. They always wave, ask if I need anything. Good people raised by a man who figured out how to be a decent father after he came back from the dead. They'll never know the truth. And that's as it should be. Some truths are too heavy to share. Some burdens you carry alone. The truth belongs to me. The peace belongs to me. The choice to forgive was mine to make. Let me ask you something. Ever been in a spot where you had to choose between justice and peace? Between doing what's right and doing what's good? Because sometimes we learn that protecting innocent people matters more than punishing the guilty. Sometimes wounds heal better in silence than in courtrooms. Give this a thumbs up if you believe forgiveness takes more courage than revenge. If you understand that sometimes you win by laying down your weapons instead of picking them up. Now tell me straight, if you were in my shoes, would you have sent that letter? Or are there some secrets that should die with the people who made them? I chose to let that secret die with Charlie, and I was reborn the day I made that choice. Charlie died twice, once in 1984 when he faked his death, and again in 2024 when he really passed. I only died once, the day they locked me up for something I didn't do. But I chose to be born again when I learned to forgive. How about you? How many times have you died? How many times have you chosen to rise again? Freedom doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. And sometimes the greatest freedom is choosing not to use the power you have to destroy other people. Think about that. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone. Sometimes people need to hear that you can be free even when the whole world says you're guilty. And if you've got a story like mine, I'd like to hear it. Because everyone deserves to be listened to. Everyone deserves to have their truth acknowledged, even if it's just by one person. Until next time, remember, revenge is a prison, but forgiveness is the key.